Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. India is planning to rapidly build up its military infrastructure as well as deploy more troops along its border with China. Indian Information Minister during a presser said that the federal cabinet has approved raising the battalions to 7 battalions on its border with China. Some reports earlier suggested that India also plans to deploy 120 tactical missiles along the border, which will allow Indian Army to target dual-use Chinese infrastructure and the military bases on the Tibetan plateau. Tensions between the militaries of the two countries had been rising over the years that have resulted into scuffles and skirmishes. In June 2020, we saw an incident happen. There was termed as the Galwan Valley battle, in which Indian side lost 40 soldiers while 4 deaths happened on the Chinese side. Also, most recently, we saw scuffles happening between the two militaries in the Tawang sector in December 2022. The Chinese side has urged the Indian side to manage and control strictly the frontline troops and together with China to maintain peace along the border areas. And today's program will try to understand what is the aim behind this military build-up and more of the troops deployment along the Chinese border from Indian side. And given that the two neighbors are the nuclear-armed countries, what possible fallout it might have if any further escalation happens, and what could be the way forward to de-escalate the situation between the two sides. To understand that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Dr. Tughral Yamin. He's senior analyst. Dr. Tughral Yamin, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News. Once again, really appreciate that. Starting with the aims and the goals or the ambitions of the Indian side for this rapid military build-up and the build-up of infrastructure along the Chinese border. What do you understand? What are the key reasons for that?
Jawad sir, thank you very much for inviting me. You have yourself mentioned that it is because of the tension between China and with China. And we know that the Americans are trying to prop up the Indians as a counterbalance to the Chinese. It has been happening for a long time, and now China is a strategic partner. We know that it's a member of the Quad. So what's happening is not gradual. It's not, I think, very hurried. It has been happening for a very long time. India has been building up its forces on the north as well as the northeastern sector. We have the 14 corps in the north, in Kargil, Leh, etc., Ladakh, and in the towards the east we have the 3rd Corps. What they are doing now is, as you mentioned in your preamble, is that they are raising 7 more battalions of Indo-Tibetan Police Force. And Indo-Tibetan Police Force is one of the 7 central police forces. They are paramilitary units. They are not regular units. They are composed of people who belong to that area. If you look at the photographs of people who are recruited into the ITBP, they look like Tibetans or Mongols. So it was raised in 1962, way back after the Indo-Chinese War in 1962, in which the Indians got a thorough beating. And they began with 4 battalions, then they expanded to 60 battalions, and now with the additional 7 battalions, it would mean about 7 more, 67 total units. So if you do simple mathematics, you have about 10,000 people in a division. So one battalion typically has 800 to 1,000 people. So 60 battalions means 60,000 people, 7 more battalions, 10 more battalions. So about 7 to 8 more divisions. But the difference with the regular army is that they are police force. They are police force and they are commanded by the members of the police force. Even now they are being, their DG is from the Indian Police Force cadre. And there's only one paramilitary force, the Assam Rifles, which is commanded by the Lieutenant General. Rest, all of them are commanded by policemen. So they're not raising new battalions. In regular battalions, these are paramilitary forces, but they will free up regular battalions to be employed elsewhere. That is the connotation of raising of these 7
So,
battalions.
what happens to be the reason? Because there was an agreement between the two sides in 1996 which prohibited the use of guns and explosives near the border. So, if according to that agreement in 1996, if it is prohibited, so what's the point of raising the military build-up along the border?
So the paramilitary forces don't use heavy ammunition, you see. What they have been doing in 2020, whatever had happened in Galwan Valley, they were merely scuffles. They pelted each other with stones, or they resorted to hand-to-hand combat, or they used clubs, things of that sort. So it was exactly under the protocol that you mentioned, 1996, that you will not use ammunition. So the paramilitary forces typically carry side weapons or small arms.
Yet it results into loss of life, as we saw in the Galwan Valley battle.
The Indians lost 20 of their men, the Chinese lost 4 of their men. When you fight hand to hand, the death can be very cruel. You see, if you get shot by a bullet, you can die instantly. But if somebody strangles you or somebody throttles you, it can be a very painful death. That is what happened. So not using live ammunition has its drawbacks.
Right. Let me bring in Dr. Adam Saud, expert in international relations. He's a professor and the Dean of Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences associated with Beria University. Dr. Saud, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. India is planning to rapidly deploy more troops as well as build up its military infrastructure along the border with China. The core reasons why now? Because we haven't seen that sort of an escalation perhaps since 1975.
Well, actually, there may be multiple reasons, but what I think is the Chinese military build-up, Chinese military modernization right now. We have seen that when Xi Jinping he came to power back in 2013, the Chinese PLA it started modernizing itself, and now we have seen that they are just following the footprints of America. Particularly, if we talk about the even the use of artificial intelligence in their military modernization. So since we know that China and India, they are competing against each other, they had military, a background of military conflict as well. So we see that in order to balance the military modernization by China, they are also building up their weapons, and they're also modernizing their weapons as well. Secondly, we see that after the 2020 scuffle between the Indian and the Chinese forces over there, both sides they are actually building up their military posts particularly, and we have seen that certain landing strips and the facilities which are being established over there in the border region. It's not only the Indians, but we have seen that the Chinese, they are also developing their road infrastructure into the region in order to have more access and better access to the border region, the line of actual control that is declared over there. So I think that it's not now that these the Indians they are going, or both the sides they are going for military build-up in the region, but it's been a long time. Although that was the agreement which you referred right now, 1996 agreement, which actually forbids both the sides to have weapons or use of weapons into this particular region. But Dr. Tughral Yamin, he is a soldier, retired soldier, he knows it very well, and a student of international politics. Maximization of power is what is the need and the desire of any state.
So what sort of implications do you think it's going to have for the overall region and its peace and security?
Well, actually, we know that this region is, it is a turbulent region. It's not only China and India, but India and Pakistan as well. Afghanistan is insecure, and there are certain other smaller conflicts which are ongoing and going on into this particular region. So I think one is the arms race. Definitely, when India is going to modernize its military, to increase its military build-up, definitely for the sake of balance of power, Pakistan also has to invest into that particular field. So it's one thing. Secondly, if we again look in through the perspective of the BRI project, the CPEC particularly, we see again that is at the stake when the instability it comes into the region.
That is actually meant for the prosperity and the well-being of the people of the not only one country but the entire region.
Right? Indeed, it is. But again, the Indian we know that India and China, they have more than $100 billion of bilateral trade right now. And we have seen that over the period of time, just look back 2-3 years ago, you would see that all those moves, particularly if we talk about the resolution that was moved into the UN General Assembly against the Chinese, so-called atrocities in Xinjiang region, India abstained from the voting. It did not say anything against China. Similarly, it never, say anything against China over the Taiwan and the Hong Kong issue, because they have this military bilateral trade as well. And I think so that China is the largest trade partner with India right now.
But as far as we understand, the violations along these areas in the last couple of years had been from the Indian side, as the Chinese side has urged them to manage and control the frontline troops strictly. So if the thing that you have just mentioned, that India abstained, so there are bilateral trade relations between the two countries, so why violations on this side?
Well, actually, we know that there are certain internal factors which also contribute for the foreign policy and defense policy of a state. And we see that when Modi came to power, particularly when he came to power for the second time, we have seen that the domestic, in order to appease the domestic audience, we have seen they have taken certain steps which are which I personally think would take India to something negative in near future, I would say. And I personally think to appease that those voters, particularly the BJP voters and the Rashtriya Savak Singh and the terrorist or the militant organizations, extremist organizations in India, it's very much important to have a policy of animosity against Pakistan and China particularly. So I personally think just to to appease or to.
So do we understand it is also connected with that expansionist ideology under the that very Hindutva ideology that BJP and RSS carry along?
Yes, kind of, because personally I think right now India cannot have a full-fledged war or full-fledged conflict against China. Not only because they have the trade relations, but obviously we know that we have very recently seen the Ukraine and Russia war that has actually plunged both the countries into economic crisis. So I think India aspiring to be the third largest economy in near future and one of the great powers in near future, it would never try to have a full-fledged conflict with China, same as case with the China.
Right.
But just there are certain smaller scale border skirmishes kind of things which actually gives strength to your political ambitions sometimes.
Right. Dr. Tughral, Yamin, as Professor Saud has said, that India won't go to that extent that the situation escalates beyond a certain limit. What's your take regarding? Do you agree?
He's right, absolutely right. You see, raising 7 paramilitary units is not a big deal. As I said, it will just free up 7 regular battalions for employment somewhere else. More worrisome is India's great designs, is aspiration to become a great military power. They have increased their military budget, and recently there was also this conference in India about making their defense exports more sustainable. They want, I think that their defense minister said that they just don't want India to be a place where you can assemble military hardware. He was urging the Indian businessmen to actually start exporting military hardware, because so far India imports a great deal from Russia, from USA, from Israel. So they want more autonomy in terms of military hardware. So and the case is on its northern side with China is that the border is undemarcated. You see, they call it the line of actual control, and the line of actual control is according to each country's own interpretation. Chinese thinks that the line passes at a certain place, the Indian thinks that it passes through a certain place.
Is it because of the complex geography there?
It has
Or
never
are
been.
there
It has
other-
never been demarcated. For example, the line of control in the disputed Jammu and Kashmir, it has been demarcated. You see, it has been each post has been demarcated. The maps exist. Each side agrees. That is why we call it line of control. The case is different in case of China and India. They call it line of actual control. So if the Indians come forward, the Chinese retaliate. And there has been a policy of India's gradual encroachment into what the Chinese think is their territory, particularly in Arunachal Pradesh and Tibet and Ladakh area. That is what happened in 1962. Nehru told his troops to keep moving forward. And the Chinese tolerated to an extent, and they gave them a big resounding slap. It was a counterattack, and they went down up to Bengal and they came back of their own accord. The Indians could not do anything, but that started raising alarm bells that the Chinese are powerful and you cannot take liberties with them. And he's absolutely right. They still don't want to go to war, but they also do not want to be humiliated.
So if they really don't want to go on a full-scale conflict with China, keeping in view their economic interests for the future also. So as you already mentioned, the increasing 7 battalions over there along the border is not that a huge a deal. So what's the point of deploying 120 tactical missiles?
You see, these are all, this is all power projection. If you deploy tactical missiles, you say that, hey there, we can strike targets up to such and such range, say 60 kilometers, 70 kilometers, 80 kilometers, 90 kilometers. So if you attack us, we can use our missiles, whether they are nuclear armed or not, that is another thing. But it's a kind of deterrence, it's kind of power play. You are telling the other state that we have these 120 tactical nuclear missiles and we can use them in case of any war. So we are not fighting on the line of actual control, but we are fighting not very deep into your territory, but say 60, 70, 80, 90 kilometers into your territory. And they have tactical missiles, they have BrahMos, they have Prithvis, and
but by the way, range goes far beyond, as you mentioned, 60 to 70 kilometers. It has a range of 500 kilometers.
500 is not tactical nuclear missile. It's a medium range missile. A tactical nuclear missile is typically less than 120 kilometers. So that's what is called a tactical nuclear missile. It's supposed to be fought on a battlefield.
Right.
And if it's more than that, then it becomes a strategic missile.
Dr. Saud, what's the point of deploying these missiles there?
Well, I agree with Dr. Yamin. Actually, sometimes you have to show your power. Sometimes you have to tell the adversaries that, if you talk about these missiles, I'm just forgetting the name, Prale or probably Prale. These missiles actually, they are capable to deviate their route, in search of their target.
Hence become difficult to detect as well.
Exactly, not only to detect, but in order to intercept as well, So they have this capability as well. But again, I would say that this is probably for the defense purposes, just like Dr. Javed said, because when the Indians they declared a cold start doctrine against Pakistan, Pakistan developed the tactical nuclear weapons to deter the Indian cold start doctrine. So I don't think that they would be used as aggression or offensive strike against Pakistan or India. But India aspires to be a great military power in very near future.
But clearly there had been violations and misadventures on the part of Indian side most recently.
Well, we have seen that BrahMos missile that fell into Pakistani territory. That can happen. And the good thing is, I say that the Indians, they responded very wisely, very professionally, and they actually did an inquiry, and the culprits are those people who were behind that misadventure. I won't say that was a misadventure, but actually that was a mistake, a human error that caused that.
But that is what they called.
That is what they called.
That is what they called. So, Dr. Tughral,
yes,
that raised alarms not only in Pakistan but across the globe, in the region as well.
I think they were testing waters. I think they were absolutely testing waters. It was done.
So I don't understand where the Indian wisdom comes in that.
It was on purpose.
Error, or whether it was human error or anything else.
It was on purpose. They did it on purpose. They were testing your responses. We responded late. We kept quiet.
We exhibited restraint, right?
Sorry?
We exhibited restraint at that.
We did, but we could have told them point blank that we will not tolerate this. So
a categorical message was conveyed to them.
Much later. You see, the Americans have just shot down the alleged.
But they also waited for a couple of days. I mean, there was a lot of criticism
for 4 days, but
on Biden administration that they kept
They say that they were still loitering over their in their air. Okay, so when they went out of their territory, but it was still over the Atlantic, they shot them down because they say that they thought it would be dangerous for the people underneath. But they did shoot down.
But the Republicans said it was a test for Biden administration, and especially the president himself, and he failed.
Whatever, they did shoot it down. See, and they did not let the incident go by, just like that. So in our case, we couldn't have done anything, but it landed dangerously close to one of the airfields. And had it been weaponized with a nuclear warhead, it could have caused.
So how China has responded and reacted to these violations by Indian troops over there along the border?
About the ITBP?
What's the policy?
About the ITBP?
Yeah.
They haven't responded in a big manner. Again, as I said,
and earlier violations which were happening.
They have also improved their defenses. They have made their infrastructure better. They have moved up their roads, and they have increased their vigilance, surveillance, things of that sort. And I think this surveillance balloon issue is something new, because now the Ukrainians are saying that the Russians are flying the balloons over their airspace. So the Chinese are taking all proper precautions. They don't want a repeat of that. And what the Indians are doing is very minor as compared to what has happened before.
Right. Yeah. Your point is well taken. We are joined by another participant on the phone line, Mr. Syed Hasan Javed. Is the former ambassador. Mr. Javed, thank you very much for taking time out for views on news tonight. Really appreciate that. Now the military built up along the Chinese border from India, and also the plans to deploy more troops over there. What core aims do Indian side have behind this thing?
You see, if you recall this conflict, of course, it has a long history, and as you know, in 1962, and despite the international support, at that time Western world support to India, and the Prime Minister Nehru's forward policy, India got a very humiliating defeat in 1962 October-November war. So, and of course, more recently in Galwan Valley, as you know, in May-June 2020, there were clashes. Both sides, of course, did not engage in firefight, but the clashes nevertheless resulted into casualties. So what and then as recently as 9th of December 2022, which is actually 2 months ago, there were clashes, although those clashes were not of firefight, but in Tawang area, as you know, broadly there are 3 areas where these clashes have been taking place, like Tawang area, and you have also Tughral area near Bhutan, India, China border, as well as in the Galwan Valley and Pangkhong Lake area, Deksang Plains. So these are 3 areas. As you know, the disputed border, according to Indians, is a long border of 3,400 plus kilometers. But actually the Chinese regard this Arunachal Pradesh, as you know, of 90,000 roughly square kilometers, part of China, southern Tibet. And so recently what you asked me about the Indian efforts to ratchet up the tensions. You see, the Chinese have played cool. They have actually shown their eagerness to diffuse the tension. But the problem is with the Indian mindset and with the sort of support that India is now getting from the Western world, not only because of being a member of the what you call Quad, and but also in every the Western world is committed to contain China and using India as a proxy. This is no secret. So Indians have been very much intransigent in their attitude towards the Chinese, and also you see the Indian have made no secret of their of this intransigence, and they have actually maintained the policy that what is mine, but what is also yours is mine too. So in that sort of attitude, you see tensions building up, and Indians are actually undertaking quite a heavy deployments in that area, more than roughly 60,000, I think, already. And already in those areas, the Galwan Valley clashes. So I would say these three areas, Tughral and the Tawang area, are really
Right, Mr. Javed, beg your pardon for the interruption. So what possible implications for the regional security and stability and peace these overtures by Indian side might have in the both immediate and the long term?
Well, it will have quite an impact, I would say damaging impact, because you see the Indians are now in a different kind of mode. They never had what you see is that the are banking on all sorts of technological and intelligence and surveillance equipment receiving from the United States and the other Western powers, and also trying to provoke the Chinese. Although whatever the results would be, that would be after that. But they think that with Pakistan facing its own economic crisis, and China, and with the recently what you call the Western efforts to ratchet up containment of China, efforts, the Indians think or see themselves as very ideally placed to provoke the Chinese at this moment. And so it has long-term, of course, even more dangerous implications. But this is very unfortunate what is happening, because they think that at this moment India can take on China and use this, as is happening, as you heard from Brigadier Tughral, Yamin, about what is happening in Ukraine. And the efforts of Western powers are to create at the moment as many hotspots as possible for the Western economies to stage a comeback. The arms industry itself, and that is what precisely India wants to be acting as a pawn to the Western
right.
powers.
So Mr. Hasan, Mr. Hasan Javed, when you mentioned that India is doing these overtures on the behest of the Western powers in order to contain China, don't you think there should be a realization or any sort of realization among the ranks at the hem of Indian authorities be there that it might have an economic fallout that might be detrimental to the economic interests of India itself in the future?
Well, India at the moment is on a different level. If you try to understand the Indian psychology, Indian strategic mindset, they think that they've already reached the moon. And they, in a metaphor sense, they think that they actually now already, every sentence of Indian media would start with the world's third largest economy, and others, and especially the media outlets in the West buy this narrative because it serves their interest to project a very bigger than life picture of India, so that to make all other countries in the region, particularly in South Asia, given Pakistan's own issues and problems with our economy, to create a sort of a fait accompli sort of thing, that we see India as the dominant power, and which is now, which cannot be stopped, which is actually maybe it is not actually, I would say, as much reflecting the ground realities. India has its problems, and quite severe problems. So at this moment, you talk about economic. Of course, China has a very robust trade relationship, out of which at least of $125 billion in 2021, out of which only $25 billion were where India's exports to China, $100 billion were imported into India from China. So, of course, this robust relationship. But India is actually, now in a different level. They think with the Western support, they can, for them, China doesn't matter, or they could probably, they are very well placed to take on China, and so this might lead to some miscalculations actually, and because the Indians, have a history of hegemonistic, mistakes and errors they have done, and so you what you ask, it have implications. Already the Chinese companies are banned from India, as you know. Many companies, apps, and even TikToks and all those are banned in India, and there is a very at the popular level, there is a anti-China sentiment very strong in India.
Right, Mr. Syed, Hasan, Javed, former ambassador, thank you very much for joining in with us at Views on News tonight on the phone line. We really appreciate your time. Dr. Tughral, Yamin. Now, when we talk about the realization among the Indian authorities, I mean, on the behest of the Western nations, if they continue to do such type of overtures to contain China, shouldn't there be a realization that it's not only going to be detrimental for the peace and security of the region, but also going to have an economic fallout for themselves also?
Tehami Saab, the Indians are very clever people. They are very shrewd, they are very intelligent. They will never provoke Chinese on the behest of the Western nations. They will go to a certain limit and not beyond that. And whatever they are doing is for the old self-defense, for the old conservation. Dr. Saud has said that, the ambassador said that, he said 100 billion, he said 125 billion. So this is the kind of trade that they have. Chinese have a long history of being peaceful. They don't want to fight. Chinese also know that they don't want to fight with India at all. Their foreign minister currently is in France, and I think he's on his way to Germany. And what they're trying to impress upon the Europeans is that they are impartial in the war in Ukraine. Although they have professed their undying love and friendship with the Russians, but they say that we don't want to be part of that war. So they don't want to be part of any war. They want to become stronger, richer, more powerful. They're not going to fight with Indians. Indians are below their level. They are not in their league, even if they call themselves the third largest economy. Indians also know that they don't need to fight the Chinese on anybody's behest. So whatever, Indians, like many other bullies, they will only bully people or nations which are weaker. They will never try to take up a fight, quarrel with China, because China has already given them a bloody nose in 1962. And even in this Galwan Valley incident, if you see, 20 they're dead, 4 Chinese dead. So even in hand-to-hand combat, they could not beat the Chinese. Well, so I don't think they will go beyond
So when we
limit.
specifically talk about Pakistan, so there is quite an imminent danger when it comes to Indian high-handedness and the hegemonic designs towards Pakistan. So what Pakistan needs to do in that regard with this sort of a military build-up? Because when we talk about the deployment of these 120 tactical missiles, it's not they are not going to be deployed along the Chinese border only, but they are going to be deployed towards Pakistani border also.
So you don't need to do anything. You just have to keep your guards up You need to have your surveillance systems better. You need to acquire information in a much quicker time frame through surveillance balloons or whatever. That is the only thing you can do. Even India knows that Pakistan is a nuclear armed country and there is nuclear deterrence in place, and you cannot fight either conventionally or strategically with Pakistan. What India can do with Pakistan, and it has been doing for a very long time, make things difficult for us internally. They can send fifth columnists like Kulbhushan Yadav, or they can pump in money and give it to terrorists operating out of countries on a western border and planting bombs in a mosque in Peshawar and things like that. There's an uptick in insurgency, we see it. So the hostile agencies are paying. India is part of those hostile countries who are hostile to Pakistan. In fact, we claim that it is the only hostile neighbor that we have. We do not say anything about other countries. As we say that our nuclear weapons are just meant to deter an existential threat from India, from nowhere else. So they're doing it internally. They're economically trying to strangulate you. They're demonizing you as a country supporting terrorists. So that's what India is doing. They can't fight you. They can't fight the Chinese. What they're trying to do is come up in the world as a country which has got nuclear powered submarines, with aircraft carriers, with latest tanks, with Rafale aircraft. But these are things which are better shown on the military parades rather than in the battlefield in the current state of affairs.
Dr. Saud, what economic fallout, the realization among Indian authorities about the possible fallout on the economic front if the escalation happens further?
Well, I think I would agree with Dr. Tughral. I don't see any, full-fledged war, but definitely, for the sake, to become a global or a big power, military power, definitely India has to invest more into the military build-up. And they have increased their military budget over the period of time. It's not only the Chinese ambitions, but the Indian-owned hegemonic designs that force India to go for modernization in military equipment and military hardware. And we have seen that, they have started certain other programs. Maybe they are thinking about the space program as well. So these are the ambitions, and obviously that cost. Everything that is, built up, it has a cost. But one thing that I have seen over the period of time is India has been very successful to project its soft power at international level as well. That soft power is actually used as a cover to its military build-up and to its atrocities so far human rights and civil liberties are concerned. And we have seen that international community is not that much critical towards the Indian policies.
But recently we saw that the BBC aired two-part documentary, and BBC offices in Mumbai and New Delhi both have been raided. This is the third consecutive day the income tax officials are there.
Yes, it happened right now.
So India is being exposed before the world.
It is. But so far if I talk about the government policies or the states, behavior responses towards India, they're not that critical, which should have been. When there are different areas where the human rights violations are being done across the international level, the whole world, where these states actually they criticize those human rights violations. But when it comes to the matter of India, particularly we have seen, when Modi came to power, and henceforth we have seen the Western governments, they are not that much critical to the Indian government. And
but they have been critical because when we talk about the revocation of Article 370 of Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, that particular issue was raised both in the European Parliament as well as in the UK Parliament. So there was criticism, and many international organizations had been highlighting there had been severe human rights violations when it came to Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. However, yes, on this front we can say that there hasn't been any concrete action from the international community. Particularly major powers.
Even then, I would say, that was a time when there were only talks and discussion, and that's it. There was not a single practical step that was taken by the international community against India at that time. That was a failure at the part of Pakistan's foreign policy as well, I would say, because Pakistan could not engage its traditional allies, particularly during those crises. But again, it's a matter of economic relations, trade relations, because we have seen that India has increased its trade relations not only with China, but with the Arab and the Gulf countries as well. You know, the states actually have relations based on their national interest. You know, this friendship and this animosity, it's a matter of time.
Let's go back a little in history. We talk of the economic interests, India being the third largest economy in the world as they claim it. I mean, let's go back in history before the World War II. Germany, the Nazi Germany was a big economic power of that time also. It had very cordial relations with the US also. There were a lot of seats which were named against him, against the Führer in the United States of America. Then we saw they might not be calculating that this particular situation could spiral out of control. But the entire world saw that everything went out of control. And there was humongous loss of life. And then we saw the nuclear bombs being dropped also in that war. So why not to have the right calculations before anything out of proportion happens of that sort?
Do you think nations are making the right calculations in the Ukraine war?
So what are the lessons to be learned from there?
The unfortunate thing, Tehami Sahib, is that we never learn from history. You see, whatever is happening in Ukraine will lead to more bloodshed. Russia has a certain position, it has a maximalist position, it says NATO cannot come over here.
So we can't completely rule out the possibility of this particular situation not spiraling out of control just because of the economic interest between major countries in the world.
Why doesn't the Americans say a word about the atrocities that are being committed in Palestine? Why don't they say a word? They don't say a word. It's happening every day. Young men are being shot. They are instituting new laws. They are making new settlements. Why aren't they saying a word? The world is not a fair place. They think that they have to support Israel in the Middle East because they consider Israel their ally, despite the fact that the Saudis and the other Arab countries are their allies, they are partners in various defense programs, but still they hedge their bets on the Israelis. Similarly, the Western nations are hedging their bets on India because Pakistan they can perceive as allied to the Chinese. So this is an unfair world, and you see the threat from your own prism. So Pakistan right now is seen only from the counterterrorism threat. They are willing to support you in the counterterrorism effort because they think that might hurt them. But beyond that, they are not going to criticize India, not at all. That is not on the agenda.
Dr. Saud, your take, when we compare that time before the World War II and then all that damage and destruction that was resulted in the aftermath of World War II, and any sort of a miscalculation at this point in history might also lead to something damaging and destructive of a humongous scale.
One thing, when you don't have existential threat, then I think you can't go for that large scale of war, one thing. And I don't think there is any existential threat to any of the countries in the region right now. Secondly, although we haven't learned the lessons from the history, but so far, but it's my personal opinion, humanity has learned a lesson from the Second World War particularly. We see that after the Second World War, the Europeans, they have integrated themselves economically, and now we have seen the next level which they have reached to. Similarly, many countries in the world, particularly the hotspots where the wars that can happen, most of the areas they are nuclear right now. So if and when this thing happens, there are chances of a nuclear war, and that war it would not only be damaging or creating a chaos into that particular region, but it would have global impacts, severe, deep global impacts. So I think the policymakers, they have that thing into their mind that if we go for this full-fledged war, what you are referring towards the Second World War, that would be that would wipe out half of the population of the world. So I think we cannot go for that kind of war. But yes, small-scale wars, small-scale conflicts, maybe the proxies in other countries, like Dr. Saab has very rightly said, India would always continue these proxies against Pakistan through neighbors, through its own, spies against China, and same would be, Pakistan may be doing against India
there are
as well.
certain developments when we talk about US support to India in the defense domain. Now, there is a special law in the US that allows India to have that defense cooperation with Russia. So the US doesn't have any objection on that. India recently acquired S-400 also, and there is another initiative most recently that's been announced for India for the transfer of the technology and also for the engines from the American company also. So what is that actually meant for?
Actually, Dr. Saab has, again, I would support him. Indians are very clever. They are real statesmen. They have played their cards. It's not the Americans or the Russians who are planning all these games, but these are the Indians who have good relations with Russia, and they have similar kind of relations with America right now. Just one example, when Pakistan was an ally of America back in 1980s, Pakistan continued with its nuclear program, and the Americans, they never created problem for us. Once the Afghan war, it ended, they put Pressler amendments on Pakistan and, all that thing. Same is the situation. Right now, India is a kind of, necessity, inevitable, I would say, quoted, for America right now into this particular region. I talk about the Indo-Pacific region, where it wants not only wants to contain the Chinese rise into the region, but also, it wants to have a check onto the smaller regional powers as well. So right. I think it's the convergence of interest right now for America and India that lets India to have good relations with Russia as well.
Point well taken. Dr. Adam Saud, expert in international relations, professor and dean faculty of humanities and social sciences at Bahia University. I really appreciate your time. And Dr. Tughral, Yamin, senior analyst, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on Views on News tonight also. With that, we come to the end of today's show. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.